Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Military Personnel Subcommittee. Our hearing today is a hybrid one. We are going to be looking at the Military Criminal Investigative Organization's reform recommendations from the Fort Hood Independent Review Committee. We will have two panels today. The first panel are members of the Fort Hood Independent Review Committee who have firsthand knowledge of the findings and recommendations made and given to the Army. The second panel are the heads of each of the services, investigative agencies, who are here to tell us how their agencies work and could be improved. The Fort Hood report is required reading and continues to reveal new challenges and problems, as well as demonstrate the devastating impacts of problems that have gone unaddressed, but also, and more importantly, new solutions. Ultimately, it's a guidebook for how to create a smarter, safer, and more ready force. The Fort Hood Independent Review Committee's report is a stinging repudiation of the Army Criminal Investigation Division. The combination of woefully inadequate experience among the investigators, in fact, 92% were apprentice agents, coupled with understaffing, created a doomed operation that resulted in unsolved murders until civilian law enforcement stepped in, a disturbing sexual assault conviction rate of 22%, and an installation in which soldiers felt unsafe, a damning result. What the Independent Review Committee found was startling. Quote, "The Fort Hood CID is a training ground. These young, inexperienced agents were checklist-driven, focused on developing a case file that simply checked the boxes rather than identifying and working leads and suspects that are most likely to resolve cases," unquote. Fort Hood CID investigations were extremely long. Quote, "The yearly average days to complete an investigation between 2016 and 2020 ranged between a high of 214 days in 2016 to 115 days in 2020. Sadly, quote, "Victims seldom saw the outcomes of their cases, and there was minimal deterrent value derived," unquote. Perhaps most disconcerting is that, quote, "A large number of sexual assault cases were lost or dismissed at court-martial, partially due to investigations that were rote and lacked essential evidence," unquote. And finally, the Fort Hood detachment was under-resourced and under-experienced. During 2018, 2019, and early 2021, typically 1/3 of CID positions at Fort Hood were unfilled. There was a very limited in-house capability to conduct cell phone tracking and exploit mobile phones, laptops, and other electric devices. an inability to maintain liaisons with local police, and the failure to provide the proper materials to support search warrants. And none of this would have come to light without the tragic deaths of so many individuals. Among them are Specialist Vanessa Guillen, Private First Class Brendan Weddle Morales, Private First Class Scott Rosenkrantz, Sergeant Elder Fernandez, and Specialist Freddie Benigno de la Cruz, Jr. For them, their families, friends, and soldiers in arms, we must demand greater professionalism and accountability. We must give the MCIOs the tools they need to make sure investigations are done right, the staffing to be able to complete cases in a timely manner, and rigorous evidence-gathering capabilities sufficient to hold criminals accountable at a court-martial. The military often says that it has zero tolerance for sexual assault. But when criminal investigations are haphazardly done, consisting of box checking, it undermines any hope of accountability and does a disservice to brave service members who make an unrestricted report. And that, in no way, is zero tolerance. It is the job of this committee to ensure that the military completes a fulsome, thorough, and competent criminal investigation for every reported crime. While the Fort Hood report focused on CID, I believe that all of the MCIOs, CID, NCIS, and OSI will benefit by doing an internal review of their respective departments, with an eye on the Fort Hood Committee's findings and recommendations. I've said it before, I'll say it again and again. I'm heartened that Fort Hood leaders have already taken some action within their authority to improve. But until all the findings and recommendations have been put in place, and Fort Hood is well on its way to being, quote, the great place, unquote, it professes to be, we won't look away. We won't turn our backs on our service members. I will ensure we keep our foot firmly on the pedal until the Army turns itself around and our service members and their families are safe. I now would like to invite Ranking Member Banks to make an opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I share your concern about the conditions at Fort Hood and look forward to hearing from our panelists today. The Fort Hood Commission's deep dive into the Army's Criminal Investigative Division on post highlighted very concerning issues. Rookie agents were sent out on their own. Leaders struggled to keep their heads above water, and support functions were non-existent. Just 12 of 76 uniformed agents at Fort Hood had more than 1 year of experience. These apprentice agents should, by definition, have been mentored and supervised by experienced agents to learn the ropes and keep investigations on track. Instead, the lack of experienced agents and adequate resources resulted in long case lead times and poor investigations. Individual missteps added up to chronically lackluster investigative work on suicides, homicides, and sex crimes on and off post. Only 1 of 53 suicides in CID's jurisdiction received a completed postmortem behavioral assessment. Sex crime cases progressed slower than nearly all other comparable posts and undermined a soldier's belief that allegations of criminal wrongdoing would be taken seriously. For many victims of crime at Fort Hood, justice delayed felt like justice denied. The Fort Hood leadership also failed to use a variety of tools to connect with local law enforcement and disrupt hotspots of known criminal activity. These tools are available to every post commander, and they have been used successfully elsewhere in the past. I'm interested to know exactly why that wasn't the case at Fort Hood. This is no way to handle serious crimes. I look forward to hearing today from the seasoned investigators on the Review Commission about their impressions of the situation at Fort Hood and what they believe could be done to produce better investigations in the future. I'm especially interested in their findings about how the Army could better resource CID offices with admin and support personnel to keep agents in the field doing investigations rather than behind a desk. Our second panel includes representatives from each service's criminal investigation division. Each service has a different model for tracking this problem and is designed to fit their mission and deployment needs. Hopefully, we can learn more about what builds strong military investigators and how the Army plans to move forward in improving CID. With that, thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
I would like to ask unanimous consent that non-subcommittee members be allowed to participate and ask questions after all the subcommittee members have had the opportunity to ask their questions. Without objection, so ordered. Each witness will provide a brief introduction and their focus on the committee. Then Mr. Swecker will present a joint statement on behalf of the Fort Hood Independent Review Committee, and each member will have an opportunity to question the witnesses for 5 minutes. We respectfully ask the witnesses to summarize their testimony in 5 minutes. Your written comments and statements will be made part of the hearing record. So it's an opportunity now for me to welcome back both Mr. Swecker and Ms. Ricci. For those of us that were able to participate in the last hearing, you certainly wowed us with your presentations, gave us lots of food for thought, and your report has become a Bible of sorts that I carry with me on my plane rides and find that every time I read it, I learn something new and unfortunately something that dismays me even more. So with that, let's welcome our first panel, which includes Mr. Chris Swecker, the chair of the Fort Hood Independent Review Committee, Ms. Carrie Ricci, the member of the Fort Hood Independent Review Committee, Mr. Andy Banks, consultant, Fort Hood Independent Review Committee, Ms. Mary Counts, consultant to the Fort Hood Independent Review Committee. Thank you all for being here today.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Spear and Ranking Member Banks and distinguished members of the subcommittee. We appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss our findings, the findings of the Fort Hood Independent Review Committee. In the interest of time, we are doing a consolidated opening statement. I'll try to summarize it and get through it in the next 5 to 6 minutes if possible, but as you've noted, the rest will be entered into the record. As you know, the former Secretary of the Army appointed 5 executive members of the Fort Hood Independent Review Committee, but also we were supplemented by 5 subject matter experts who assisted in various tasks associated with the independent review. And I'd just like to briefly introduce the 4 members that are appearing here today. Carrie Ricci is a retired Army JAG officer who served 3 years at Fort Hood, including as trial counsel, is now senior executive serving as Associate General Counsel for the Department of Agriculture. Mary Counts served over 25 years as an FBI special agent and supervisory special agent in offices such as Honolulu, Washington, D.C., El Paso, and FBI headquarters. She's worked and supervised investigations of drug cartels, gangs, crimes against children, and kidnappings. In her role with the FHIRC, she conducted 157 face-to-face interviews with female service members at Fort Hood, the majority of whom were assigned to the 1st Cavalry Division, 3rd Cavalry Regiment. She also summarized the 1,800, or the group, over 80 group interviews that we did that encompassed over 1,800 service members of all ranks. She also reviewed CID investigative files of sexual assaults and death cases. Andy Bland is a 23-year veteran of the FBI. His final assignment was Special Agent in Charge in Houston, but he also served as the FBI Legal Attaché in Baghdad. He was the Deputy Assistant Director of the Inspections Division of the FBI and also served as the head of the FBI Training Academy at Quantico. As chair of the FHIRC, I'm a former state prosecutor in North Carolina. I spent 24 years with the FBI and retired as the acting executive assistant director over 8 FBI divisions, including their CID, Cyber Division, International Operations, and 5 other divisions. I currently practice law in Charlotte, North Carolina. It is absolutely critical to understand the basic mission of CID and assessing its effectiveness. The fundamental objectives of CID are set forth in Army Regulation 195-2, Section 1-6, entitled Objectives. The relevant portions are in the opening statement, but I want to mention two of them as areas where we had particular focus, and that is in the area of serious felony investigations. That's one of their mandates. The other is maintaining a proactive criminal intelligence collection, analysis, and reporting cycle to alert commanders to threats and criminal elements. Commanders who are provided with validated criminal intelligence can initiate appropriate force protection measures. Members of this committee interviewed various members of the 11th MP Battalion, relevant CID commanders at Fort Hood, CID agents, dozens of CID stakeholders on and off the base, including police chiefs, sheriffs, district attorneys, JAG officers, federal prosecutors, community leaders, Texas Department of Public Safety, Texas Rangers, and the FBI and other federal agencies. We reviewed all death and suicide cases and a broad sampling of sexual assault files. Dozens of data research and analysis products were conducted which provided highly relevant insights into the CID operations and effectiveness. As you know, our finding, one of 9 findings in the report, stated that the Fort Hood CID had various inefficiencies that adversely impacted accomplishments of his mission. We determined that the criminal detachments were understaffed, underexperienced, overassigned, and poorly supported, leading to inefficiencies that had an adverse impact on investigations, especially the complex cases involving sex crimes, soldier deaths. We determined that these inefficiencies were the result of staffing protocols and other policies and procedures that transcend Fort Hood. But it's very important to note at the outset that this finding does not challenge the competence, motivation, work ethic, or on-site leadership at the Fort Hood CID. The issue is one of inexperience, resources, staffing methods, and the overall CID business model. A significant portion of the report addressed the role of CID in conducting prompt, thorough investigations of death, felony, and sex crimes cases. An important objective that we looked at was the scope and role of CID in providing that criminal intelligence, as I mentioned, to Fort Hood commanders to enable them to adopt mitigations. In essence, we found, as you mentioned, Chairwoman, that it was a training ground. There were simply too few journeyman-level agents to work the complex sex crimes cases, death cases, while still mentoring the large number of inexperienced and uncredentialed special agents who were constantly transferring in and out. There was minimal continuity and institutional knowledge within CID. It also impacted law enforcement relationships, as discussed in the report. The inexperience of the CID special agents was evident in our on-site file reviews that our members conducted of the death, suicide, and sexual assault files from fiscal years 2018 to 2020. These reviews revealed some areas of concern as to investigative attention to detail, completeness, and file documentation, which increased with the complexity of the investigation. State and federal prosecuting attorneys and local law enforcement advised there was minimal interaction between their offices and CID. Unlike other Army posts, there are no CID agents embedded at any of the local police departments, and they could not remember a true joint investigation. We determined that serious crime issues on and off the Fort Hood were neither identified nor addressed proactively. There was a conspicuous absence of an effective risk management approach to crime incident reduction and soldier victimization. In short, the staffing model, as it relates to Fort Hood, did not effectively work to support their mission. There were not enough experienced agents to provide continuity and institutional experience to work complex cases or be proactive in crime prevention. The CID needs to have a balanced mix of apprentice, experienced, and journeyman-level agents to provide a stability and ongoing expertise. There should always be a cadre of experienced and highly experienced investigators to handle the over 340 sex crime cases and 20 to 30 death cases per year at Fort Hood. These are complex matters that involve forensic evidence, evidentiary warrants, evidence analysis, and informed judgment about investigative strategy. CID must be provided the capability to work joint investigations with their state, local, and federal counterparts and not wait for a crisis investigation such as Vanessa Guillen to do so. Among the 11 recommendations we made were that the CID command should evaluate its staffing model and personnel movement protocols for high-tempo, high-turnover offices like the Fort Hood CID, to ensure they are staffed at a level where they are capable of working complex cases on and off the installation, engage in proactive crime suppression in conjunction with Department of Emergency Services and commanders, especially drug suppression, as well as competently handling the death and sex crime cases. And just to wrap it up here, we asked the CID and the Army Department of Administrative Services to evaluate whether this requires a greater number of CID civilian special agents of the 1811 category for purposes of continuity and effectiveness in handling these cases. This concludes the opening statement. As chair of the FHIRC, we welcome the opportunity to field any questions, and with your concurrence, I'll direct them to the appropriate team member that's present.
Thank you, Mr. Zwecker. Does that complete then the presentation of your panel?
It does.
All right, so we'll move on to questions. Let me start off by talking about drugs. In the report, you indicated that the highest drug test failure rate per test taken was at Fort Hood. You also said that that the drug crime rates for fiscal years 2015 to 2020 were almost 31% higher than FORSCOM. And it appears that in one case in April 2020, a soldier overdosed on methamphetamine and fentanyl. There were no interviews, no crime scene investigation, no apparent attempt to determine who supplied the drugs. There was no attempt to investigate the soldier's history of drug use or identify the identity of his associates. Can you speak to why that is so wrong?
Yes, ma'am. I mean, all we had to work with was what was contained in the investigative file in the four corners of the file. We felt like consistent with the CID mission of gathering proactive intelligence, criminal intelligence regarding harvested from the cases that were worked, that meaningful information could be provided to the commanders to actually engage in mitigation and prevention. We just didn't see that happening, and I think by their own admission, CID said they just didn't have the experience and the resources to do proactive criminal intelligence. We felt like death cases, particularly the one you're talking about, where there was a drug-related overdose, ought to be fully investigated to determine if there were lifestyle issues. Where did the drugs come from? Who supplied the drugs? How'd they get on the base? In order to try to engage in proactive measures to prevent that from happening if possible. I mean, it certainly would have helped the commanders be armed with that kind of information. It's their responsibility to conduct mitigation and protect, look out for the health and safety of their charges. Ms. Ricci, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, sorry. No, that was basically what we found. I agree completely.
So, for instance, in another setting, deficiencies in failing to pursue all logical investigative leads were also noted by the committee in another high-profile case, a soldier who went missing and ultimately committed suicide. Conspicuously absent in the CID file was any documentation of a search for the soldier, nor was there any indication that a key witness was contacted or interviewed. The totality of the facts contained in the file led the FERC to conclude that the initial underpinnings of what might be a motive on the part of another to engineer the soldier's disappearance existed, which is a pretty profound statement. I'm assuming this is the Hernandez case, is it not?
I'm going to try to be careful about specific cases because some of them are ongoing, and I've been told there's some issues associated with disclosing information in a pending file. But let me just say generically across all of the death cases that we looked at, the more complex the case was, the more striking it was, the leads that weren't followed in many cases, and the incompleteness of the file. We're not saying that these investigative steps weren't taken; they just weren't in the file, so we couldn't see it. Andy Bland conducted a couple of the relevant file reviews that you're talking about, as well as myself and Mary Counts, and I'd like Andy to address the specific case that you're mentioning. Andy, I think you're on mute.
Okay.
There you go.
You hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you for allowing me some time this morning. It's a pleasure to be here, and specifically as it relates to the inquiry. Yes, I had the opportunity to review what essentially was probably the top 5 most complex cases that CID has undertaken here of late, and this particular case, really represents a microcosm of all those things, all of those observations that Chris enumerated at the strategic level. And what it really underscores, as I looked at the file, is not being, prescriptive or critical of the investigation and how it ensued, but what it really underscores and really illustrates is that those of us who have spent decades involved with and leading and supervising investigations can look at a file retrospectively and we're able to ascertain quite quickly, the steps that could have been taken to run some of these leads to ground. And so for that to really be something that a person like myself or Mary or others can extrapolate just by reviewing, a black and white, file, months after the fact, really goes to the heart of what Chris described as there has to be, clearly a mix in terms of the experience level of agents, because the ability to provide insight and optics and to conduct an investigation of this complexity or of this ilk, it doesn't happen by way of osmosis. It doesn't happen overnight. Those instincts, that sort of visceral, experiential review, the ability to know which way to go, that happens over time, and it happens with mentoring, and it happens with making mistakes. And at the end of the day, it also happens by way of having supervisors who have been there and done that, who have the credibility necessary to understand what needs to be done when they review the files of what their investigators have done. So hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you. Let me just ask one final question, Mr. Swecker. If you had the Vanessa Guillen case file and you were reviewing that as a 24-year veteran of the FBI, what would you do to the individual who provided you that particular file? You referenced a number of times during the investigation where it was perfunctory or box checking.
It's not, I will maintain it's not the fault of the inexperienced agents. They have 2 and 3 years of experience. They're assigned a very complex investigation. That's a difficult question to answer in terms of if you're asking, is anybody accountable or should be held accountable for some of the shortcomings in the investigation? It was just a I shouldn't say grossly, but vastly inexperienced staff there. You could tell from the interviews, there were 2 or 3 question interviews. They were mostly done by phone, particularly some of the key interviews. Some of the key follow-up questions either weren't asked or they just weren't documented in the file, and the dots just weren't connected. There was an absence of what I would call a master case agent coordinating everything, looking at forensics, looking at prioritization of leads, looking at allocation of resources in the hotspot areas, instead of sort of running that checklist-driven investigation. So I wouldn't lay the blame on the individual special agents. I think it's more the system. They themselves are victims of a system that it would be, again, I mentioned it being analogous to an busy FBI field office like New York office being staffed almost 80% of new agents right out of the FBI Academy. You don't even hit your stride as an investigator, I don't think, until about 6, 7 years into it. And unfortunately, I don't think that the CID has a cadre of 5 to 10 to 15-year agents. Many of them leave, I'm told, by the time they get some level of experience.
All right, thank you. Ranking Member Banks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first question is, what stood out to all of you most about Fort Hood CID's overuse of novice agents?
So I'll take a stab at that and then pass it on to the other 3 members. 93% apprentice special agents in 2019 among the enlisted ranks, 63% apprentice special agents in the warrant officer ranks, and the supervisors that were on scene were occupied with administrative duties and things that took up a lot of their time that takes away from mentoring. So it just jumped out at me. I don't think any investigative agency that I know of would staff their offices that way when they have complex cases on the table, death cases, suicide cases. The Guillen case, a very complicated case involving all kinds of electronic evidence and forensic evidence, and begging for coordination from some centralized case agent, having to get warrants. Warrants are complicated. Writing and articulating affidavits to get communicate the probable cause to obtain a warrant is difficult. I just don't know of any other model out there that staffs offices that are that busy with such inexperienced agents. And let me pitch it to the next, to Carrie.
Yeah, I'll just add that the Judge Advocate General is in the middle of a military justice redesign that focuses greater expertise and experience where it's needed. And so what struck me as the JAG offices are in the middle of this redesign was that the investigators are not, and that type of redesign is needed as well among the investigative force.
Anybody else?
Andy?
I think probably appropriate to defer to Mary at this point, Chris.
Okay, Mary? You may be on mute.
You're muted.
Yep, still, Mary, I think you're still muted.
Yeah.
Let me move on. I don't have a lot of
Okay.
time.
All right.
So
Sorry.
for both of you who are here, tell us what are the most effective ways for us to blend and integrate junior and senior investigators?
I think first and foremost, it's a staffing issue. It's a resource allocation issue that comes from higher up. There have to be incentives for agents to stay, and some areas where they can actually promote up and develop their careers as investigators. We don't see that. I mean, this is anecdotal, but what we hear is when agents get to a certain level of experience, they go somewhere else. They go to an IG office, they go to one of the federal investigative agencies. But I would go back to this issue of staffing and resource allocation. That is a fundamental that's a fundamental duty of those higher up the food chain, and it's a business. I talked about a business model. I don't think there's any business out there where you would staff a critical business function with primarily overwhelming number of inexperienced agents or agents that are either not credentialed or just haven't hit that experience level where they can be competent to act alone.
Ma'am, any other thoughts on how we integrate junior and more seasoned investigators?
I would just say that training and mentorship is critical in any profession, and so it's no different here. Having that mentorship and that ability to bring along the junior agents is critical.
Okay, my last question. Throughout your review, what were the key skills that appear to be lacking among the CID agents?
Primarily investigative acumen, the kind of knowledge and skill that comes from having at least 5 years of experience, knowing what leads to prioritize, knowing how to deal with, what evidence is most relevant, where the hot spots are in a special investigation where you devote more resources, for example. If you have a particular suspect, devoting and allocating your most experienced agents to that particular suspect in that line of inquiry, if you will. Obtaining warrants for forensic, for electronic evidence, which is ever present in every investigation these days. Cell phones, cell phone tracking, pinging cell phones, collection of forensic evidence takes a certain skill, and then interpreting the forensic evidence, knowing where to go and what to look for.
Okay, thank you. My time has expired.
The gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Escobar, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks again to our experts who've devoted so much time and their expertise in helping us in this moment. This issue obviously stretches far beyond Vanessa Guillen and Fort Hood. I can tell you that in my district, Fort Bliss, we have seen some really alarming stories, heartbreaking stories, not just those that have made the headlines and made the news, but individuals who've reached out to me to share their own personal experiences. And the knowledge that this is just the tip of the iceberg, these are just folks who are willing to tell their stories, who've reached out to me personally, is really deeply alarming. Thankfully, at Fort Bliss, General Sean Bernabe has really, he's fairly new to the installation and has made some great changes. But we have so much work to do. And just a couple of the cases that have really shined a light for me on other issues that we have to address. Private Asia Graham, she is a young woman who was found deceased. She had accused someone of sexual assault, and later 2 other women came forward and alleged that this perpetrator had also assaulted them. So there was a pattern there that leaders missed. There were things that were happening there repeatedly that leadership did not see. Another one of our military personnel at Fort Bliss, Richard Halliday, Private Richard Halliday, disappeared. He was regarded as AWOL until, finally the others were sounding the alarm about him having gone missing for so long. So there's a number of different things that we've got to change. Some things obviously are more challenging than others. But as we think about a transition that CID needs to make, and everything that you all have brought to light about CID, all of the deficiencies, the lack of experience, the lack of resources, if we are to transition to something that is a better functioning investigative arm, how do we make that transition? If we, for example, are able to civilianize more of those positions, or maybe civilianize the whole thing, how would you recommend we begin to make that transition? How quickly can we do it? What are some initial steps that you might recommend? I'm trying to think about what should be done internally, what needs to be done legislatively. Just would love your insights on how do we get where we need to be as quickly as possible? What does that transition look like from today into the future?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Just to follow up on your early theme there about serial offenders, one of the most disturbing things that we came across during the interviews was within 2 days, interviews like Mary and Andy and Carrie had already identified 2 or 3 serial offenders, which goes to one of the main CID missions was to harvest that intelligence out of those files and those investigations and get that to the command so that they could act on it. And that, again, they didn't have enough experienced agents on board to actually connect the dots and do the things that need to be done to address that intelligence function. And we said in the report that we would like to see more, we think that there ought to be more 1811 investigators. There's several advantages to that. 1, they don't transfer around as much. 2, they have powers off the base. Fewer issues with posse comitatus, and being able to work joint investigations and actually have authority outside the military installation, especially work joint investigations. So much happens off the base that involves soldiers, and what we saw was a big gap there in terms of working true joint investigations where they could actually elbow to elbow work cases together and share information real time. And nothing drew that out more than the interviews that were conducted. I don't know if Mary's off mute, but Mary, during the course of the interviews, you made some observations I thought were fairly poignant as far as gathering intelligence and getting that information to the command.
That's true. I hope everyone can hear me now.
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Thank you. During the course of the interviews with the victims, as well as interviews with witnesses and with other people who had extensive knowledge of these incidents, we heard textbook grooming, serial offender, repeat offender, predator, over and over again. So as Mr. Swecker said, we were able to put together a list and almost know when that person came in to be interviewed, what case they were talking about. And I think whatever model CID goes to, there needs to be an emphasis on focus, and they need to be able to prioritize their investigations, and it can't be one size fits all. A gang rape and a physical assault cannot be investigated as opposed to another case. You have to be able to go after those people that are not only victimizing soldiers, but could possibly victimize others in the future. And I think they have to be able to transition to those cases pretty rapidly.
Thank you.
All right, the gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Carl, is recognized for 5 minutes. Mr. Carl, are you available? You need to unmute yourself.
You look very good, but you don't have any idea.
Mr. Carl? Mr. Carl, you're recognized. And you're muted. All right. Let's see if we can unmute you. We'll move on then to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Jacobs. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here. Finding number 9 in the report was that the command climate at Fort Hood has been permissive of sexual harassment and sexual assault. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about how Fort Hood is different from other bases, since we know this is a problem elsewhere. What was unique about Fort Hood in particular, and how worried are you that there are similar cultures of impunity at other bases?
It's hard to talk about other bases because our focus was on Fort Hood, although we heard anecdotally in the interviews, I think Carrie, Mary, and Andy and others that did the interviews heard about places, other bases where accountability was more strict and there was quicker action when an incident took place and a report was received, and the victim, more aggressive steps were taken to protect the victim pending the case as it wound through the criminal justice or the military justice system. What we saw at Fort Hood, we don't think it was an aberration, was a flawed, sharp structure itself, which we addressed in the report. But we also saw priority placed on brigade readiness for deployment as opposed to the health and welfare of the soldiers, which we discussed at length in the first hearing. So we don't know if that's an outlier, but I think anecdotally we got stories during our 700 interviews and the group interviews that encompassed 1,800 soldiers from soldiers who had been stationed at other bases that in many cases Fort Hood was an outlier. Now we commissioned 49 research projects by a research group at West Point. Their comment to us was they had never seen a situation where one base stood out as an outlier in terms of AWOL, in terms of deserters, in terms of drug usage and drug arrests and positive drug tests, felony cases. I mean, of the 49, it was striking, they said, to see that one base was such an outlier in terms of all the 49 different areas that we had them look at.
Yeah, sorry, I don't have anything to add.
Mary, Andy, anything you want to add to that from the interviews?
Yeah, I would, Chris. I think it needs to be said that, in many respects, we attribute it to a lack of leadership, a lack of emphasis. As we've talked about, what's important to the leaders is going to be important to their subordinate leaders and the troops themselves. And so when you look at what they call special emphasis programs like SHARP and EEO and things of that nature, those were tools that were available to the commanders to be able to emphasize those areas that ended up being deficient in these types of cases. And so, again, troops are going to go where they're led, and it's necessary to have the requisite leadership in place from the top down. They're going to make sure that the priorities are in place to ensure our soldiers are taken care of.
Thank you. And I guess my follow-up, and Mr. Bland, since you talked about this a bit, is, I heard you say this was an issue of leadership, and I guess what I'm just trying to figure out is how much was the sexual assault climate problem the result of poor command leadership, or the problem with CID being untrained, as you all have highlighted in your previous answers? And I was just wondering if you could expound on that and talk about how the leadership issue bleeds into the CID problems.
If I may, Chris, I think it's essentially the manifestation of all those things in the aggregate, right? So it's kind of like a perfect storm all coming together. Chris had indicated in the report that only 3% of the cases that are worked by CID or worked by the MPs or by CID involve these types of cases. Well, that 3% ended up being, a bee's nest, a hornet's nest for the Army. And so I think if you look at the totality of what we looked at and the recommendations that were made, at the end of the day, leaders have to be held accountable in some tangible, some palpable way that, make it part of their review, make it part of their report card, those types of things, so that you can emphasize at the very top that those things are absolutely categorically important. It all starts from the leaders.
May I add that the leadership issue was an issue of omission, not commission. It was not placing emphasis on the SHARP program in general, placing emphasis in priority in other areas, which you would expect an Army combat brigade and command to place, which is readiness. But during the course of that, they completely, utterly neglected the emphasis on the SHARP program, and it never got down to the troop level, the NCO level, to the enlisted ranks, where 80% of the victims and the subjects resided. I personally, and I think the other members of the committee share this, we're not placing all this at the foot of CID. We just made a note. That's one of 9 findings, that a CID is not responsible for all of the issues at Fort Hood. What we were saying was, in the course of the review, we saw that in the case of complex cases, that there was a lot of inexperience, and we just felt like, and it wasn't even a close call, that addressing complex cases was a problem. And without that deterrent, and without all that good intelligence being harvested and provided to the commanders to take mitigating action, then that sort of added to the mix, as Andy described it, as a perfect storm. That all came together.
Gentlewoman's
Thank you.
time has expired, and she yields back. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Fallon, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Mr. Sweaker, I noticed, what my colleague just mentioned, and I saw the same thing. Finding number 9, I found alarming. The fact that it was a problem with the command. And I also noticed that on the chart that we were given, that Fort Hood, pretty much literally on every single category, for violent felonies, violent sex crimes, rapes, all the way down to drug crimes, drunken disorderly, larceny, even AWOL, there are higher incidences on average across the board, which I think really illustrates that it's rather obvious it's a command problem. And so do you think that I believe Fort Hood is the largest base we have as far as active duty troops, kind of like in a big city, there's just higher crime. Do you think that the fact that it is such a large base has something to play into the fact that they have larger instances on average of crime?
That's part of it, but we were looking at crime rates, not raw numbers. So per capita crime and a lot of the things, most of the things that we were looking at were on a per capita basis. So it wasn't the raw numbers, but we found it an aggregating factor, if you will, that there were known risks of all of these things because of all these reports that have been done over the years. The fact that these were combat brigades, that 80% of the victims and perpetrators were in the enlisted ranks. That was well known. That these are 18 to 23-year-old soldiers, where women were the minority in these brigades, and the interviews bore that out. That there was a serious risk there that was known or should have been known by leadership from the top down. And unfortunately, because of the lack of emphasis, the lack of addressing these known risks, the NCOs, where the rubber meets the road, became blockers. They did not facilitate reporting. They did not encourage reporting. In fact, many of them were the perpetrators, and many of them were part of the ostracism and the shaming of the victims, so that there was a deterrent in actually filing reports of sexual assault and sexual harassment, et cetera. Anything, Carrie, you want to add to that?
Now, I would just add that there were regular reports such as IG reports, command climate surveys, that type of information that was available to commanders, but that just wasn't acted on.
I mentioned in the first hearing that the climate surveys there were red flags throughout in all of the key commands.
Yeah, it's incredibly troubling. As far as CID, you obviously mentioned that it was lack of training and mentorship, inexperience, resources, staffing, that kind of thing. And instead of a tour, would there be a value in, instead of it maybe a typical tour being 3 years and then a PCS, maybe making the Army, giving the option or mandating maybe it's a 5-year tour, and then also coupled with, as you said, some 1811 investigators. But do you think that would add some value to extend the tours for the military investigators?
Well, anything that allows a particular busy office like Fort Hood to develop a cadre of experienced agents would be a good thing. Whether it's more 1811s, slowing down the transfers, restricting them from going off and doing protective detail, which seemed to us to be a distraction for special agents that could have been spent doing investigations. We felt like the MPs could handle that kind of detail as opposed to pulling from the special agent ranks. But anything that provides continuity in the office, experience. What jumped out, as I said earlier, to all of us was just simply the lack of a group of trained, experienced agents, even in the 5 to 8 year range. There just were very few of them, and if they were, most of them were supervisors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was shocked. I mean, when you said 12 out of 76 had 1 year experience or more, I can't even believe that. It
was actually, there were, I think, somewhere around 90% of the enlisted agents were apprentice agents, and 63% of the warrant officer special agents were apprentice. That didn't leave many to actually mentor these inexperienced agents. And then a number of them were diverted for other duties, evidence custodians, cyber, et cetera. And they were chronically understaffed, somewhere around 60% throughout the time period that we looked at. So you got understaffing, inexperience, and then we talked about under-resourcing in areas of forensic exploitation of cell phones and other electronic evidence. They only had one license to exploit a cell phone. Those are proprietary software licenses that you have to extract evidence from a cell phone. During the Guillen investigation, 2 of them expired, so they had one left for the pendency of the Guillen investigation, and that was a key avenue of inquiry for that investigation.
Thank you. My time is expired.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Garcia, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for holding this very crucial hearing and for allowing me to participate. It has been almost a year since the family of Vanessa Guillen first contacted my office for help. At our very first meeting, I listened to their concerns about the handling of the case by CID and could not believe what I was hearing. Throughout our work together and many meetings and visits to Fort Hood, I was consistently disturbed with the actions of CID and the negative impact they had had on the Vanessa Guillen case, from failing to look into claims of sexual harassment as a motive, not properly interviewing Vanessa's family members and friends, and the reassignment of a CID investigator in the middle of the investigation. I have seen firsthand, as have the Guillens, the problems that plague Fort Hood. I appreciate the work of this committee and of the Special Review Independent Committee. Their findings and recommendations align with my experiences with CID, and I will continue to fight for a change to ensure that what happened to Specialist Guillen and her family never happens again. With that in mind, Mr. Chairman, I wanted to ask you, during my visit to Fort Hood, CID agents said that while they were currently investigating the murder of Specialist Guillen, they were not looking further into the claims of sexual harassment, as that role would fall to her command. What can be done to ensure that CID is allowed to fully investigate a crime, including possible motives, just as any other law enforcement agency would?
That's a very good question. Andy and I discussed the narrow, and Mary had discussed the narrow scope of some of these investigations when there were other issues that were relevant to the investigation, one of them being sexual harassment in that case. And we often were looking for that sort of thing in the file, and we couldn't find it. I don't think that's something you have to, I mean, it may be something that you have to address through Army regulations, but it seems to me to be a logical investigative avenue to pursue.
Well, it seemed logical to me, and I raised the issue when I was there on June 23rd, my first visit. And they started trying to give me a lecture between the difference between a CID investigation and a sexual harassment claim. And frankly, I had to stop them and remind them that I was a former judge and a lawyer and that I knew a little bit about that. But let's go on. One of your findings was a concern that the Guillen family had brought up, that the lead investigator was transferred. Is that common practice, or did you find any evidence of this happening in other investigations? I mean, it seems like he could have gotten a waiver or permission to stay on until the end of the investigation. It just doesn't make sense to me. So is this the practice in the armed services to do this?
That was puzzling. Given the severity and the importance and the gravity of the investigation, it was just puzzling that the special agent in charge transferred out, particularly in the absence of what we thought was the role of a case agent. So it looked like the supervisors, the ASAC, the Assistant Special Agent in Charge, and the Special Agent in Charge sort of functioned as the overall case agent, coordinating all aspects of the investigation. In most investigative agencies, they would have a case agent themselves doing that, and the supervisors would be above that, looking at strategy and resources and things like that. So that made it even more puzzling.
But is it common practice?
We don't know. We just saw it happen at Fort Hood, and we also know that just transfers in general, PCSs in general, are a major factor in the lack of experience and continuity in at least at Fort Hood, and we suspect at other offices that are busy.
All right. You also said that there were resources were non-existent from the battalion. No guidance was given, and it was almost non-existent until MG, which I guess is Major General Elflint, inquired into whether CID had sufficient resources and expertise. Do you recall when that happened?
It was about midway through the investigation.
Would you say it was June, July?
I would say June, somewhere about mid-June. It was really perplexing that the MP.
So the Major General had even asked until then.
But the lieutenant colonel who was over the 11th MP battalion,
which was Colonel Overland.
No, this was someone else. Overland was the 3rd Cavalry Regiment commander. This was someone that is responsible for the CID detachment there, as well as other CID detachments. Unfortunately, that commander, that lieutenant colonel, did not step in. First of all, we think that there should have been a recognition that they needed more resources, more people on the ground, more help with affidavits, more help with forensics, more help with evidence extraction and that sort of thing, and analysis. And that didn't come from the chain of command within the CID detachment there, which would have been the 11th MP Battalion. It came from Major General Efland, who finally walked over and said, "Do you need anything?" to SAC NEF. And that's when they got more resources. Basically, this is at least what we were told, was the resources came when Major General Efland walked over and had a meeting and asked if they needed any help. And after that, help came.
Well, that seems to coincide with the call that I made to White House Chief of Staff Meadows and to Army Secretary McCarthy, because that's the first question. My first concern was that they had the resources and capacity to handle all that. So,
Gentlewoman's time has expired.
thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back. Thank you, sir.
The gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Carl, excuse me, is recognized.
Yeah, it's so simple. It's easy to get confused. Madam Chair, can you hear me now?
I certainly can, and I'll never make that mistake again.
No, that's fine. Don't worry about that. That's simple. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a judge. I'm a business person. So my question is this spike? I'm gonna call it a spike in the drugs and in the all these different crimes. Is there any way we can link that to management when new management of the base may have came on board? I know there would be a time lag there, but to me, it from a leadership standpoint, the buck stops here, and I have to take responsibility for it, and then I'll take care of it down the chain. It sounds like we're trying to identify the criminals ourselves instead of trying to encourage the management, whatever rank that may be, to actually take responsibility for what's going on. So my question is there any way, or has anybody thought about trying to link the timeline with the people that are supposed to be responsible for the welfare of these soldiers?
I addressed one of the more important functions we felt like of CID was to inform command of trends, patterns, criminal intelligence, et cetera, things that were part of reports, but these reports were compartmentalized. There was a monthly crime report, but it really didn't analyze the crime, identify hotspots, identify establishments, trends, patterns, and that sort of thing. There were reports on crime rates and felony crime rates, all the different crime categories. They were high in some areas. Drugs were one of them. So those of us that have worked investigations over the years know that any kind of black market drives crime, whether it's drugs or something else. And drug suppression efforts, drugs themselves, usage and selling of drugs is not conducive to good order in the military. There's talk about legalization, and legalization is all around us, but it's not conducive to military readiness. And we felt like that was an area that should have been addressed by CID, Department of Emergency Services, and the Provost Marshal to arm the command with information about all of that. But we were told that drug suppression was a lost art, at least at Fort Hood. Let me open this up. I've been doing a lot of talking. I'd like to open it up to the other panel members to see if they want to address the question.
No, I don't have anything further.
Well, my follow-up question would be, do we not have an established drug testing program at Fort Hood?
There is, and there is at every military installation, and the drug results are reported. I don't know that anybody was really watching or highlighting those reports and interpreting what they really meant, nor were they harvesting any intelligence from the positive drug tests. Or trying to develop, as we mentioned in the report, sources of information. So you could interview every single person that tested positive and try to find out where they got the drugs, what do they know about drugs, try to develop some live sources of information and actively engage in drug suppression efforts. But I was told that is a, quote, lost art. Andy, Mary?
I just think briefly, Chris, that not only do I concur with everything that you've said, but it goes back to the fundamental aspects of what an investigator does. Being able to understand you need to go that extra yard to do those types of things, to connect dots, to develop informants, to be able to drive some sort of indicia or analysis that will take you to where you may have criminal activity taking place. It's those things that your grassroots investigator does as part of their responsibilities, and quite frankly, should be part of their passion for the job. Mary?
Thank you. I would like to concur with my colleagues, but I would add from the sexual assault standpoint, we also interviewed SHARP representatives. And the SHARP representatives that I interviewed, every one of them told me 3 out of 4 female soldiers who report to Fort Hood within 8 months of being there, ages 18 to 23, it was almost an initiation to either be sexually assaulted or sexually harassed. That was unbelievable to me. 1, that this was happening, but 2, that this was known by people who are in the program that's supposed to, prevent this kind of behavior. And again, it goes to leadership. If you know this is happening, you have a responsibility to stop it. And we did not see that.
Thank you so much for that. And Madam Chair, I'll give my time back to you.
I thank the gentleman. To follow up on the Congressman's question, it wasn't, if I recall correctly, your report said this was not an issue of leadership just in this narrow period of time. You suggested it dated back to 2013, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So it was the leadership under a number of generals or colonels that basically had their eyes off the ball. So this has been going on for quite some time at Fort Hood, correct?
I think that's correct. I mean, it was a question of sort of malaise as it relates to the sexual assault program or the SHARP program, and just sort of pushing it aside because there were other priorities.
And then there were 64 sexual assault cases per special agent at Fort Hood. How does a special agent handle 64 cases?
So let me clear that up a little bit. That was per special victim investigator, which is a higher category with more training. And there were only, because there was such a low number, the ratio was huge. That's not to mean that they were individually working 60 cases. Those were mainly the 1811s. There were 3, I think, varying numbers of 1811s that were in that category. They were there to mentor and to sort of oversee all of the sexual assault cases, but it just seemed like a very low number, and you couldn't possibly, even as if you were just overseeing and mentoring these inexperienced agents, we actually felt like they should have been working the investigations, but they weren't really working them. As we understood it, they were simply overseeing them and trying to create some direction and oversee the cases.
So the leadership at Fort Hood has changed. They've pulled out the entire team and replaced them. We had made a commitment in 6 months to return to Fort Hood and see what had transpired. What should we be looking for when we return?
I would be looking for active use of the Sexual Assault Review Board as a tool to manage the SHARP program and drive it and monitor what's really going on. I would look for, are they looking at the life cycle of a sexual assault, sexual harassment complaint and tracking it from cradle to grave, if you will, from start to finish, which nobody was doing, and I'm not sure they're doing it now. But somebody just seems like somebody ought to be monitoring these cases closely. Is there emphasis on the program at the NCO level so that if we were to do a survey today, would we get the same responses that we got when we did our survey and we did our interviews? I still think that there ought to be periodic, if the climate surveys show something as a red flag, that action ought to be taken on the climate surveys, which we did not see happen during the course of that. I would keep a close eye on the climate surveys because they're designed to identify red flags, particularly, one of the areas is in the area of sharp components and sexual assault reporting, fear of reporting, retaliation, and that sort of thing. I'm probably running out of. I mean, there's a number of things that I think can be done. We haven't heard. We know that the missing soldier protocol has changed. We know that that monthly crime analysis reports are being provided to the command. That started. We think those are two effective remedies or mitigations that have taken place. But I'm not sure what else has taken place since we left there.
Yeah, I would say following the metrics, the Army is good at developing metrics and following them. The Judge Advocate General, for example, reported last year that half of all criminal cases involve a specification of sexual assault. 10 years ago, that was only 18%. Those metrics tell you where you need to focus your resources. So in the same manner, commanders should be focusing on where the metrics are taking them.
Anyone else on the panel want to convey final words to us? All right, once again, Mr. Swecker, Ms. Rishi, thank you for your extraordinary contribution to the soldiers at Fort Hood and frankly, our service members throughout the military. I think this has been a very soul-searching moment for many and has caused many of our investigative units around the country to look deeply into whether or not they're doing a good job. So again, our gratitude for all that you've done.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, can we thank you as well for keeping the focus on these important issues? We appreciate that.
Thank you.
Ditto here.
Thank you. All right, we'll now have the second panel, and we'll take a 5-minute recess.
I think I'm done, right? So I can stop video. No.
All right, we now welcome our second panel. Major General Donna Martin, the Provost Marshal General and Commanding General of the U.S. Army Criminal Investigation Command, Brigadier General Terry Bullard, Commander, Air Force Office of Special Investigations, and Mr. Omar Lopez, Director of Naval Criminal Investigative Services. We welcome you all. You will each have an opportunity to provide a statement for 5 minutes, and then we will accept your other comments as written comments. And we thank you all for being here. Major General Martin, would you like to begin?
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Spear, Ranking Member Banks, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I am here to discuss the United States Army Criminal Investigation Command, known as CID, its mission, organizational structure, ongoing reform initiatives, and our efforts to address the findings and recommendations of the Fort Hood Independent Review Committee. I serve the United States Army in 2 capacities, as the Provost Marshal General of the Army and as the Commanding General of CID. As the Provost Marshal General, I am the principal military advisor to the Secretary of the Army and the Chief of Staff of the Army on all Army policing and law enforcement matters. This includes law enforcement policy, criminal investigations, criminal intelligence, Army corrections and confinement, anti-terrorism matters, and detention operations. As the Commanding General of CID, I am responsible for overseeing the U.S. Army's primary criminal investigative organization. CID is responsible for conducting felony-level criminal investigations in which the Army is or may be a party of interest. For context, my special agents conduct criminal investigations that range from murder to organized crime, and they often partner with local, state, and other federal law enforcement agencies, including the FBI and U.S. Marshals Service. I am also here to address the Fort Hood Independent Review Committee findings regarding CID. The Secretary and the Chief of Staff of the Army accepted the committee's findings in whole, and based on the committee's findings and recommendations, I am working with key stakeholders to reform, restructure, and modernize CID to address the shortcomings identified in the report and to organize CID to better meet today's law enforcement challenges. While CID remains the Army's premier law enforcement organization, providing professional felony-level investigations and simultaneously prepared to support large-scale contingency operations, we are seizing this moment to reform and strengthen CID. We can and we will do better. Since the report was released, Fort Hood has taken immediate actions on several of the Fort Hood Independent Review Committee recommendations. Some of these efforts include creating a female mentorship program and several improvements aimed to support crime prevention and enhance communication between Fort Hood law enforcement and local law enforcement. Fort Hood has also recently stood up the Supporting Warrior Action Team, or SWAT. SWAT is a newly designed sexual assault prevention training program with the goal to train soldiers on how to recognize signs and early warnings of sexual misconduct, how to intervene in incidents of sexual misconduct, and how to advocate for vulnerable service members and the survivors of sexual misconduct. Additionally, we have collaborated with OSI and NCIS to look at their organizations and consider some of their best practices and how they could benefit CID. Our efforts extend beyond just the Fort Hood Independent Review Committee's findings. They incorporate a holistic and collective approach with input from across the law enforcement enterprise. And finally, I would like to address recent media reports discussing proposed courses of action that are being considered to restructure the CID. The courses of action reported in the media have not yet been decided, and I am preparing to brief Army senior leaders in the coming weeks. The report prematurely discusses draft planning documents that cover options to address improving CID capabilities. Ultimately, any decision made by Army senior leadership will lead to an organization with enhanced capabilities, organized and led by law enforcement professionals. In closing, the findings of the Fort Hood Independent Review Committee were eye-opening to our Army, but particularly to the law enforcement enterprise. I do not take this report lightly, and reforming CID is my top priority. I acknowledge the necessity of the task ahead, and I am dedicated to the CID's time-honored commitment to do what has to be done in order to protect our soldiers, civilians, and family members. I, along with the Army's leadership, look forward to the opportunity to work with this committee to strengthen the Army's law enforcement effort, and I welcome the opportunity to answer your questions. Thank you.
General Bullard.
Madam Chairwoman Spear, Ranking Member Banks, and members of the subcommittee, I greatly appreciate the opportunity to appear here before you today. As the commander of the Department of the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, or OSI, I join my colleagues here to discuss aspects of our agency's law enforcement mission and our continuous improvement processes, especially as they relate to the Fort Hood Independent Review Committee's report. I'm very proud to represent the civilian and uniformed men and women of OSI who are supporting our United States Air Force and Space Force from 303 units located across the globe. As our Criminal Investigations Division colleagues have learned from the Fort Hood report, we too leverage the report to assess our own policies and practices to identify all applicable areas for review and possible improvement. In line with our review, I'd like to briefly cover the highlights of our observations in the areas of resourcing, training, currency, experience, collaboration, and the overall timeliness and sufficiency of our investigations. On overall resourcing of OSI to execute our mission, the department has sufficiently resourced the command to execute. Over the last 2 to 3 years, the department has significantly enhanced the resourcing of OSI to help mitigate pre-identified significant shortfalls, with more capacity projected to come online soon, specific to the areas of sexual assault, criminal analysis, and digital forensics. On the training of our OSI agents, all new agents attend our OSI Academy at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center for their initial training, along with over 90 other federal partners. Along with our initial accession training, agents pursue additional training during their probationary period and then complete annual training in a number of law enforcement-related areas. Additionally, we provide advanced specialized training in a number of areas, such as sexual-based offenses and complex case management. While we believe our training programs are effective, we can always improve, and we plan to. Specifically, while COVID has set us back on advanced training, like our advanced sexual assault course, we're using those lessons learned to explore offering more courses virtually and on demand to afford more access. On the currency of our airmen to execute the mission, OSI has averaged executing over 3,000 law enforcement-tied investigations annually over the past 5 years. This operations tempo, teamed with field commands staffed with senior agent leadership and subject matter experts, as well as specialist squadrons with on-call expertise for traditional and digital forensics, among others, helps keep our agents' currency levels high. On the issue of experience levels of our force to conduct highly complicated cases, in October 2020, OSI launched a study to examine experience levels and explore ways to better posture our less experienced members across the command. Recommendations from this review will better distribute probationary agents and ensure units with broad mission application and a higher percentage of probationary agents will be augmented with newly established field training agents. We also reviewed the experience levels of our field leadership. Our region commanders, colonels who are themselves special agents, average 23 years of OSI experience, and subordinate commanders, captain through lieutenant colonel, and GS-14s, who are also special agents, average 13 years. Specific to collaboration, the Fort Hood report reinforced 3 OSI partner-based initiatives with departmental entities to institutionalize best practices in criminal and fraud-related matters. These initiatives are designed to drive deeper partnership with our judge advocate and security forces teammates on investigations, as well as foster closer ties to agencies best placed to detect fraud. Every month, OSI reviews measures of sufficiency and timeliness of our investigations. Overall, we feel our timeliness is solid, but we are further reviewing to ensure our metrics most accurately capture the timeliness of the more complex sexual assault investigations we conduct. We also assess the sufficiency of our investigations as solid, both by our own monthly oversight program and independent reviews like those done by the DoD Inspector General and the Defense Advisory Committee on Investigations, Prosecution, and Defense of Sexual Assault in the Armed Forces. These reviews routinely report OSI cases are overall sufficiently run, but we fully realize that there is always room for betterment, and we are dedicated to that continuous improvement. I recently requested a review of our oversight program to ensure it meets our needs for both rigor and sufficiency. Members of the subcommittee, on behalf of the men and women of OSI, thank you for the opportunity to provide insight into some of the exceptional work our members do every day to protect the department. As an organization, OSI has never been satisfied with the status quo and has always sought to pursue improvement. I look forward to your questions and the dialogue that they will drive among the panel as we all work to improve our processes to best support the DoD. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lopez.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Spear, Ranking Member Banks, and distinguished committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the Naval Criminal Investigative Service and our efforts to address the scourge of sexual assaults in the Department of the Navy. I am honored to be representing the dedicated men and women of the NCIS stationed throughout the world supporting our warfighters on the Navy and Marine Corps team. As the Director of NCIS, I am a career civilian special agent and a member of the Senior Executive Service who reports directly to the Secretary of the Navy. This historical alignment continues to ensure NCIS's independence from perceived or actual undue command influence over investigative decisions. I am proud to lead a comparatively small but elite workforce located around the world in 19 field offices, 191 satellite locations in 41 different countries. NCIS special agents are also deployed to conflict areas around the world and serve aboard all carrier strike and amphibious readiness groups. Since 1992, NCIS has organized itself in a manner similar to the FBI, with a civilian director who leads both a criminal, investigative, and national security mission. NCIS special agents also possess civilian arrest authority, can seek federal and state warrants, and are able to operate effectively and seamlessly both on and off military installations. The current NCIS manpower structure evolved in the early 2000s following the attack on the USS Cole, shifting heavily towards force protection missions, supporting expeditionary forces, and covering 100% of Navy ship visits to foreign ports. In addition, NCIS, in consultation with department and congressional stakeholders, later focused efforts on protecting critical Navy and Marine Corps technology and significantly expanded efforts in cyberspace and now in combating the threat of domestic terrorism. Over the last 8 years, sexual assault cases worked by NCIS have more than doubled. Despite this increase, departmental shifts and budget constraints have resulted in NCIS manpower being reduced over this same time period. However, NCIS, in coordination with department and service leadership, has worked to surge resources from other non-intelligence funded programs to ensure that all allegations of sexual assault are fully investigated in a timely and thorough manner. In maintaining this surge, NCIS has focused heavily on two key issues: improving the quality of investigations and reducing investigative timelines. This has resulted in a very robust case oversight system and significant reductions in timelines over this same period. Due to the expeditionary nature of NCIS support to Navy and Marine Corps forces around the world, NCIS now requires that all special agents receive mandated DoD sexual assault training while attending our add-on academy at the Special Agent Program for Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. This allows us to leverage the full versatility of the Criminal Investigator Job Series, ensuring an immediate response to allegations of sexual assault anywhere in the world at any time, both at sea and ashore. This great agility comes with long-term risks associated with this unrelenting operational tempo. The degradation of support to other critical mission areas and the long-term retention of these highly experienced investigators. Departmental and service leadership is well aware of this and is carefully working with NCIS to manage this risk. Following the release of the Fort Hood Independent Commission report, NCIS undertook careful examination of its applicability to all parts of the NCIS enterprise. While this review is still ongoing and the majority of the report did not directly speak to NCIS structure, we did determine that there were many recommendations and areas for our improvement and focus. Members of this committee, I thank you for the opportunity to provide some insight into the exceptional work our members do every day. Our solemn commitment to justice for all sexual assault survivors continues to be one of my highest priorities as director. Through strong partnerships with SAPRO and service leadership, NCIS will continue to seek the technology and manpower investments needed to maintain its unwavering focus on thorough and timely criminal investigations, particularly those involving allegations of sexual assault and violence. I welcome your questions and feedback, which will enable us to continue making positive strides towards addressing reforms within the military criminal investigative enterprise. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lopez. Let me go to you first. How many civilians do you have within NCIS?
For inside of the Special Agent Corps, 1811s, for doing criminal investigations, we have 753.
And what percentage is that?
Of the whole agency?
Of civilian versus military?
Well, they're all civilian, ma'am.
They're all civilian. So, and you at one point had a structure that was very similar to the Army. What triggered your change?
Back in 1991, there was an incident involving called Tailhook Incident. Many people may be familiar with. As a result of that, there were some legislative actions as well as Department of Defense actions that resulted in separating NCIS as a, we went from being the NIS to the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, and a civilian director was appointed to lead it and civilianize the entire structure.
And Tailhook dealt with sexual assault of sailors, correct?
That is correct, ma'am.
All right, thank you. General Bullard, what is the percentage of civilian to military within OSI?
Representative Spear, we have approximately 475 civilians. My enlisted airmen are 1,053 special agents, and my officers are 290.
All right, thank you. General Martin, what experience do you have conducting criminal investigations?
Chairwoman Spear, I am not a criminal investigator. I am a military police officer by trade. I have 32 years of military service in a criminal military police role.
All right. So, General, you indicated two specifics in your opening remarks that you've taken as a result of the Fort Hood report. One, to create a mentoring program for female soldiers and a new sexual assault training program called SWAT. I must tell you, I'm truly disappointed that that is the extent of what you have gleaned from the report. Let me ask you this. Have you established a system to track the progress of specific and measurable goals, objectives, and metrics as it relates to timely investigations, drug crime suppression, crime reduction, task force, and joint investigative activities, staffing, and training?
So Chairwoman Spear, I will tell you that first, let me correct the record. Those initiatives were taken by Fort Hood and the Fort Hood leadership. As a result of the Fort Hood independent findings, my command started a bottom-up assessment of the entire command, looking at the findings and then making an assessment of those capacities and capabilities that we needed in order to build.
Well, let me ask you this. What percentage of the special agents at Fort Hood have less than 2 years' experience now?
And so as I look at those demographics, at Fort Hood currently, the number of agents with 0 to 1 year is 12.
How about 0 to 2?
0 to 3 years, right, the category I have is 21.
21% or 20?
21 total number.
21. So how does that relate to the 92%? All right, what I'd like for you to do is provide us separately a breakdown of what steps you have taken to respond to the report's request that no more than 50% be journeymen or apprentices, what you have done to reduce the number of apprentices providing special agent services, what percentage are more than 3 years, what have you done to, have you furnished a mobile phone tracking expertise, social application licenses and equipments specifically to that base?
So Chairwoman Spear, yes, that is complete.
So there are now 3 licenses there?
There are a total of 7 licenses at Fort Hood.
And they've been renewed?
All of them were not expired.
Well, according to Mr. Swecker, all of them, of the 3, only 1 was operational at the time of the disappearance of Specialist Guillen.
And so, Chairwoman, the difference is the capability that was at the battalion level and the digital forensics cell, and that cell was not used by the detachment.
And that is no longer the case then?
No, it is not.
Have you established an MOU and have begun embedding special agents with local law enforcement in Killeen and other areas?
And so, Chairwoman, the requirement for an MOU is really not necessary. It is an inherent business practice that we have those partnerships with local, state, and federal law enforcement.
With all due respect, General, the Killeen sheriff, I believe, said that he presented a PowerPoint to the leadership at Fort Hood wanting to do more work together, and they received no response to that. There are 100 soldier cases that Killeen has presently, or at the time of this particular report, and many more who are victims who are outside the base, but are soldiers at Fort Hood, and there was no work being done together.
And so, Congresswoman, I'm happy to report that that is being addressed currently. And so with the new 89th MP Brigade commander on the ground now, he has established those cells. CID is a part of those cells. And so criminal intelligence fusion is being done with state and local law enforcement and with the law enforcement on the installation.
All right. Thank you. Ranking Member Banks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. General Martin, good to see you again. You talked about the bottom-up review. Tell us about the scope of the bottom-up review.
So thank you for the question, Congressman. One of the things that we wanted to look at was we wanted to look at experience of our agents. We wanted to look at how long our agents were staying on station. And so some of the very immediate things that we did was extend our agents' time on station. And so agents can stay up to 5-6 years on station. So we also looked at those capabilities that our agents needed in order to execute these crimes. And one of our options, and the COAs, our courses of action, have not been briefed yet to Army senior leaders, but one of our COAs would add up to 300 1811s across our command to help fill some of those capability gaps that we currently do not have.
So was the bottom-up review just Fort Hood? Was it other posts, whole of Army? What was the scope of it?
The scope is the entire Army.
Okay. Fort Hood's number of open sex crime cases warranted 3 times the number of sexual assault investigators and what they were allocated. What is the Army doing to ensure that allocations for SAIs are representative of caseloads in the future?
So for all of those cases, in our assessment we found that those requirements for investigators was much higher. And so as a part of that assessment, we will grant those offices more 1811 investigators to execute those criminal investigations.
Okay. Tell me, what, in your opinion, what is being done, or what have you seen, what effort is there to rebuild relationships with the Fort Hood community and improve the cooperation with local law enforcement?
And so as the Provost Marshal General, I am in charge of law enforcement policy across the Army. And one of the initiatives we're doing right now is a community policing initiative. And what that does is it strengthens the bond between the community and the policing force. And so we've done things like bicycle patrol to put police in presence, daily contact with the public. And so we are using those initiatives to help build trust.
At Fort Hood?
At Fort Hood and many installations across the Army.
Anything specific to Fort Hood that you can tell us about that you've done to repair the relationships locally there?
And so at Fort Hood, one of the things that our agents are doing is participating in this criminal fusion initiative that's being running at the installation. We are improving our relationship with local, state law enforcement every single day. And so we're working hard to rebuild those relationships, and we're working hard to ensure that the community feels that they are safe.
Okay, that all sounds good. And those are things I would hope that we would be doing everywhere anyway. But I'm not hearing a specific answer about a specific effort at Fort Hood to repair damaged relationships, that there should be an extra effort or strategy to, I hope that you'll take that back and give us more of a specific answer to that question. Do you believe that tools like the Disciplinary Control Board can be useful in preventing crime off post?
Yes, Congressman, and as a senior mission commander at Fort Leonard Wood, I used that specifically for that purpose.
And what has been done to systematically improve case tracking, particularly for sex crimes?
I will have to take that one back for the record as well, Congressman.
Okay, and then a last question for all 3 of you. What are the most useful field skills thought in each of your training curriculums, and what is something that you wish you could do more of that you aren't resourced to do right now? Mr. Lopez, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Ranking Member Banks. I think one of the biggest or most useful capabilities that we have is our ability to direct hire. That gives us a very critical capability to really look for diversity in our workforce. We're able to go out and hire, for instance, expert investigators. We've brought people over from different agencies, local sheriffs. We bring over people from the Secret Service, from FBI, from other locations. And so when they come to NCIS after they go through our academy, they can kind of hit the ground and be a little bit more seasoned and experienced investigator. Because oftentimes, with the way in which we support the expeditionary forces, we're out there alone. There may only be 1 or 2 people or an agent afloat on a carrier, and so they have to be able to do everything. So that's one piece I think is really helpful for us. The other, just in terms of resourcing, I think the threats are becoming more and more asymmetric, and I think it's very hard to define threats in the computer cyberspace, whether it's terrorism, as being one type of threat or another, and I think that we need to really continue to look at things in a very multidisciplinary way and approaching it from kind of a holistic government. I think task forces and working on different environments, whether it's on the JTTF or other types of task forces, really is the key to combating the threats to the Navy and the Marine Corps.
Okay, my time has expired, but if both of the Army and the Air Force could respond on the record, would appreciate it very much. The chairwoman has given me the liberty of asking or allowing you to answer that question on the record.
Absolutely. Thanks for the question, Representative Banks. So I would say our strength is in the diversity of our composition. I look at our civilian agents, our enlisted agents, our officer agents, what they bring each day to the composition at the detachment level, at the squadron level, and up through the command level, and the various ways, the background that they bring in to look at a particular investigation. So that is absolutely one of the things that I've cherished as a detachment commander 2 times where I've had that composition. I've had that mix of civilian agents and military agents in the office to look at specific investigations. And then I would absolutely transition even to our deployed mission set, where again, that composition within our team gives us the ability to really look at some things through different perspectives and bring in different experience when we're tackling these problems, which of course problem solving is at the base of what it is we do. From a challenge standpoint, I would absolutely agree with Director Lopez that the cyber environment presents a very unique, very complicated challenge as we look at the authorities that we have, as we look at the talent that we have on hand, and how we tackle that problem with agents who have that cyber experience, and some of the unique ways we're looking to get after that in partnership with the Air Force, in bringing in our cyber operators to partner with our agents is one way that we're tackling that, but it's definitely something in the future we're going to have to keep our eye on. Thank you.
General Martin?
Yes, Congressman. I believe our strength lies in our people as well. Their desire to execute crimes and to give our family members, our soldiers, a safe environment in which to work. I believe that desire and that passion is there, so the strength is definitely our people. I think we are very challenged by resources. We have not had significant structural change inside of CID since pre-9/11, and yet we have had significant quadrupling cases of sexual assault. We've also had challenges in mission increase with the number of years now that it is required to maintain and retain evidence. We also have had a demise and a degradation of our military police structure. And so that effort to prevent crime has been degraded over the years, and those present a challenge to us.
Thank you. My time has expired.
Just a very brief question. Should CID or OSI or NCIS be providing the protective services as part of their function, or should that be an MP function?
So, Chairwoman, I can start with that question. I will tell you from our perspective, the way that OSI is built, with our civilian 1811s, with our federal law enforcement mandate, our engagement off base, our level of training, I believe that the mission set is properly set for us. However, what we have done is transition our model to OSI agent-led, but security forces members providing most of the manpower. So the Air Force just recently approved 54 security force member billets in order to allow us to flesh out those details, still have agents in charge of the details themselves, but that actually allowed us to recoup a number of special agent positions back to the command in order to be able to put them back against investigative duties.
Mr. Lopez?
Thank you, Chairwoman Spear. Similar to General Bullard's comments, we have been doing it for a long time, the way he just described. We have 1811 special agents who are in charge of the details for whether it's in theater or whether it's domestic. And then we use Navy and Marine Corps security forces, MAs, police officers that we train to do the support to those details.
Right. General Martin, my understanding was that there was actually someone pulled away at Fort Hood from the investigation in the Vanessa Guillen case to do a protective role for a period of a month. Maybe I'm confusing the cases. Maybe it wasn't Vanessa Guillen. Maybe it was another one. Are you changing that?
Chairwoman, it is absolutely an option that we will look at, and we'll ensure that once investigators start on a case, they are in that case from cradle to grave.
All right, thank you. Ms. Escobar, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Many thanks to our panel. General Martin, I want to thank you for the work that's been done, but I agree with our chairwoman. There needs to be, in my view, a really robust effort, because as I mentioned to the first panel, what we are seeing is the tip of the iceberg. This is just what is being made visible to us, these cases. And I think that we are in a state of crisis in many regards. I'm curious, did you, in your fact-finding role, did you review Fort Bliss?
Congresswoman, we reviewed every military installation.
Can you share with me what you discovered about Fort Bliss, what your thoughts are, and anything that you can share?
So as we looked at those installations that were division or corps, or it had a division or corps, and Fort Bliss has a division, we recognized that they also need additional resources. And so our options would lead to additional 1811s, civilian investigators, also additional assistant special agents in charge, or those ASACs at division installation level. We also looked at additional drug investigators at our division installations. And then we also want to look at the prosecution and how we support prosecutions. And so one of the options that we're looking at is actually building prosecutorial teams that consist of dedicated agents that work with trial counsel to bring cases to trial. Also, across the board, we needed about 30 civilian support agents, personnel to take care of the administrative and the logistics functions and the technology functions that happen at the corps and the division installations. And as well, to take away some of those administrative burdens, we're going to put captains, military police officers in charge of our offices to lead those administrative type functions to free up our investigators to do investigations.
Did you find, this is definitely the case at Fort Bliss, but did you find, or actually what did you find with regard to backlogs? The backlog of cases, cases that are ready to go, but just they are languishing.
So I don't have that data, Congresswoman, but would be happy to provide that to you.
Okay. I really would like to better understand how quickly those cases are moving. Part of, as the ranking member mentioned, the feeling that justice delayed, it absolutely is justice denied, especially in, when the women that I've been hearing from who feel like the inaction is a signal. It's a signal that their leadership doesn't care. It's a signal that the system doesn't care, and it's a signal that they remain vulnerable. And I feel almost as though the backlog issue is a major red flag, because as we heard with the prior panel, one of the issues also is those serial offenders, those offenders that continue to prey upon our service members. And I have a suspicion that a part of that, the part of why they feel that they are able to do that is because they feel that there's no accountability. And so if you could please share that information about the backlog with us, I really do feel like that is one of those areas where we need to do a deep dive and understand the consequences of it, in addition to how we address it and how we prevent the backlog. I do believe that that's an issue at Fort Bliss. In my remaining 30 seconds, if you could just tell us a little bit more about the female mentorship program. Every time I visit an installation or talk to female soldiers, they are hungry for this, but I want to know, will it be a meaningful, sustained, resourced program?
And so the female mentorship program that is currently being worked at Fort Hood is the brainchild, started actually at Fort Lee. And so a group of female officers developed a program called the FMMP. It's the Female Mentorship Morale Program. And that program gave women a forum in which they could get together and talk about some of these concerns. It also focused on professional development and other things that were of concern to women. It was a safe space for them to talk. And so that brainchild at Fort Lee has now graduated and is actually spreading across the Army. And we'll start at Fort Bliss, actually, as well, in 1st AD.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm out of time. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentlewoman from California is recognized for 5 minutes. Ms. Jacobs.
Oh, thank you so much, Madam Chair. In light of the criticism of CID, what would you tell a young soldier looking to become an NP or CID agent?
Thank you for the question. I would tell a young soldier that if you have an inquisitive mind, I would tell you that if you want to solve crime, or if you think that you want to make a difference, then being a part of CID or being a part of the military police regiment is for you.
Thank you. And can you tell us why military agents play such a critical role in the CID?
Military agents play a critical role, especially in our deployed role. And so part of our mission is sensitive site exploitation. We also do logistics security, and logistics security ensures that equipment that is critical on the battlefield moves from port to theater and is safely transported for our warfighters. And then we also execute wartime crimes, the criminal crimes during wartime. So military agents help us and give us the ability to execute that role.
Thank you. Could you talk a little bit more about how your agents gain experience and what some recent CID success stories are?
I would love to. So our agents, about 45% of our agents have bachelor's degrees already before they come in. But our CID agents go to the United States Army Military Police School for a 14-week course there. And the Military Police School is also accredited by the same board that accredits the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. And they train agents in the subjects of criminal law, crime scene processing, testimonial evidence, fraud, investigative reports, special investigative techniques, crimes against persons. And then our agents, as they progress in their careers, much like my fellow MCIOs, they also go to those advanced training skills at FLETC, as well as we go over to the Canadian Law Enforcement Agency, and we do other training in other schools.
And are your agents trained to handle same-sex sexual assault investigations?
Absolutely. Our agents are trained, and they are absolutely capable of investigating crimes against same-sex persons.
Thank you. And my last question is just if the Fort Hood Independent Review Committee sought your perspective or that of anyone in senior CID leadership positions as they were working on their report.
And so there were members of my agency that were attached for providing records to the Fort Hood Independent Review. But as far as an interview with me, no, there was no interview. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. And Madam Chair, I yield back the remainder of my time.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Garcia, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll start with Major General Martin. Major General, I just want to be clear. I know that I asked the question of the chairman of the previous panel, the question about the continuity of investigation when that agent was pulled away, and I think it says that he left his duties pursuant to his permanent change of station to another post in the middle of the Guillen investigation. And then in response to the chairwoman's question, you said it would be an option for them not to do that, to follow it from cradle to grave. I mean, that doesn't sound like a commitment to change that to me when you're saying it will be an option. Wasn't it an option before? I mean, can you commit to us today that that will change and that an investigator starts an investigation, especially one as complex and critical as the Vanessa Guillen case, that they will finish it through?
Chairwoman, I will make that commitment to you that yes, when an agent is involved in a complex criminal investigation, they will remain on station.
It will, all right. And I want to ask the same question. Does the Air Force have the same policy? And of course, NCIS also?
Representative Garcia, I think it's a very individual question by each unit. Having been a detachment commander 2 times and looking at turnover and what we do in projecting for investigations, how they're going to be handled. Is there going to be a transition? Do we stop that agent from initiating new cases as a case agent?
But do you have a policy or practice in place that covers that?
We do not have a policy. It is a leadership-driven.
Is there a policy or practice that if they ask for a waiver so they could stay, that it would be granted?
Representative Garcia, absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
And
That is a
NCIS?
discussion with leadership.
Thank you. NCIS?
Thank you for the question. There isn't a specific policy, but it wouldn't happen. They would stay and work the case.
Thank you. The other thing that really troubled me was the case file review also revealed that off-post suicides and deaths were not fully investigated by CID. I mean, it's just awful to think that CID would not look at off-site suicides. And as we learned during our last visit with some of the sheriffs and law enforcement locally, as the chairwoman again pointed out, there didn't seem to be a lot of cooperation. Is that normal?
No, Chairwoman, I'm sorry,
No, I'm
Representative
not the
Garcia,
chairwoman.
that is not.
There is a chairwoman.
I'm sorry. That is not typical. So that relationship is a jurisdictional issue. So if a suicide or a case happens off the installation, we do a collaborative investigation with the local law enforcement in every case. Our 1811s have that authorities to conduct those cases, but our military
I don't know
agents
what
do
an
not.
1811 is.
Our civilian
All right.
investigators. So they have those authorities off post. Our military investigators do not.
No, I know about jurisdiction, but you still would not go out there and work together with the sheriff or the constable or the police chief of that area?
That's correct. We would go out and work with them, and then we would fulfill any requirements that they have on the installation. And for example, to conduct any interviews with any service members at that time. That's what we would do to help an investigation on the installation.
Is it normal in the Air Force?
Representative Garcia, we have policy in place that we investigate all active duty deaths regardless of where they occur.
Regardless, and you work together with the law enforcement in the community if it's off base?
Absolutely.
NCIS?
We have the same policy as the Air Force.
And is that a new policy or is it longstanding? It just seems odd that the Army just was not completely aligned with that.
It's longstanding, ma'am.
Longstanding. Well, that brings me to my last question is, Do you all ever get together to compare notes, best practices, to make sure that whether it's a post or a base or that no matter where the soldier is, that they're safe? Because it just troubled us when we visited Fort Hood, when we asked people, when we had the town hall with spouses and family members, how many felt safe? Nobody felt safe. Remember, Chairwoman, nobody rose their hand.
Will the gentlelady yield?
Yes, ma'am.
One case in particular, a mother talked about keeping a gun on a shelf in the kitchen because she was afraid on base and needed it to protect herself.
I mean, is that normal? All three of you, our families have to feel safe. The soldiers have to feel safe. Our families have to have a level of trust and confidence that they are safe.
No, that is not normal for a family to feel unsafe on our military
The
installation.
whole room full of families felt unsafe, ma'am, at Fort Hood.
I understand, and we're going to work really hard to ensure that our families feel safe on the installation.
Air Force?
Representative Garcia, that is not what I would expect to hear from a military family on an Air Force installation. And we certainly work with base leadership, with our security forces partners to make sure that that is not the case.
Thank you. NCIS?
Yes, ma'am. It's the same for NCIS. We work closely with base leadership, and in fact, we partner often with Air Force and Army in locations where they have a facility, and we'll work out of their facility. So we're in close contact with each other in terms of working together. So that would not be something normal on a Navy base.
Gentlewoman's time has expired.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
The gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Lynch, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do really appreciate the courtesy of you allowing me to participate in this hearing, and thank you for all your great work. I really do appreciate it. Thank the witnesses for their willingness to help the committee with its work. I represent Brockton, Massachusetts, and specifically I represent the family of Elder Fernandez. Sergeant Fernandez met his untimely death by suicide at Fort Hood. His remains were found on August 25th, 2020. And CID was involved in an investigation prior to that surrounding Sergeant Fernandez's claims of sexual assault on the base, and obviously remains involved in the overall case surrounding Sergeant Fernandez's death. And I want to tell you, so Sergeant Fernandez, filed a complaint against a superior officer for sexual assault. And when Sergeant Fernandez went missing, I had contacted the family and expressed a willingness to travel to Fort Hood to help them find their son. However, by the time I got there, his body had been recovered, and so even though I wasn't able to help them in that respect, I tried to help them get answers from CID. And the day that I arrived, it was only a matter of days, really, from when Sergeant Fernandez had made the complaint of the sexual assault. But in that short period of time, it might have been over a week, but not 2 weeks, CID had conducted an investigation of all relevant witnesses, all relevant testimony. They had conducted a polygraph of the accused officer, and the day that I arrived, they rendered a decision that they did not sustain the complaint. They dismissed the complaint against that superior officer. But to this day, we haven't received the report of what happened to Sergeant Fernandez from CID. We've got the report from the Temple Police Department, because that's where he expired. And we have the investigation results from Killeen, Texas. But to this day, this is a young man whose body was discovered on August 17, 2020, and we don't have the report. So, Madam Chair, if I could, I would like to enter into the record a letter from the attorney for the Honorable, this is to the Honorable John E. Whitley, the Acting Secretary of the Army, and it is from Attorney Lenny Keston, who's with Brody, Hardin, Perkins, and Keston, LLP, representing the family. And they have some important questions there that I think need to be answered. And so my question to you is why?
Without objection, it'll be admitted to the record.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the investigation to exonerate the officer was completed in days, including polygraph, which I question the integrity of that process. We don't even allow that in federal court, but relying on a polygraph, you were in a rush to determine that the superior officer was not held to account. But when the family is looking for information about the disappearance of their son, it's taking forever. Even though the local police have submitted their investigation and their report, Temple, Killeen, Texas, have both been forthcoming. It's taking forever for CID to give the family the information regarding the death of their son. And I don't know if you're just trying to outweigh us. I don't understand the pace of discovery here. It's been a long time for that family to be suffering and looking for answers for their son. We got to do better than this. So why has it taken so long to give the family the information regarding their son's death?
To Representative Lynch, I don't believe that there's been a request for those records, and if there has, I would happily assist the family in receiving the report from CID.
Wait a minute. When I was there, we asked for information in person. I believe you were on one of the panels. I asked for the information, and then the family requested in writing. Do you think that a family should have to, let's set aside the fact that we asked for the information, and that's on the record, in writing and personally, and I brought the family into the hearing, into the meeting with CID at the time. They had nine officers working on this from CID. We asked for all that information. But to suggest that the Army didn't know the family wanted to know the details of their son's disappearance and death? Really? Is that a legitimate?
Representative Lynch, I will personally look into that.
The Army didn't know or didn't imagine that the family would want information regarding their son's death and disappearance? Think about that.
Gentleman's time has expired. We'll allow General Martin to respond.
Representative Lynch, I will personally take that, and I will ensure that the family gets the CID report.
Thank you, General. I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right. Each of you has referenced the fact that the caseload for sexual assaults has doubled, quadrupled. The numbers are skyrocketing. Do you have enough revenue or resources to provide the services necessary? And as the report had indicated, Special Victims Councils, which has been a huge success throughout the military, their caseload is at 60 cases, which is far too many for a Special Victims Council to handle. So my question is, what resources do you need with the exponential increase in sexual assault cases? And have you also requested additional funding for SVCs? General Martin.
Madam Chair, so our assessment would tell us that we need 20 additional special victims investigators inside of CID. We also are requesting in our reform effort to look at 8 major case response teams. And these teams would be positioned at both of our groups at Fort Lewis and at Fort Hunter Army Airfield, excuse me. And so that would give us an additional capability to surge capability on a major case with the expertise that's required. So that major case response team would not only have special victims investigators, it would also include digital forensics experts and forensic science officers.
Special Victims Councils are a different function.
That is correct, and they are controlled by the TJAG of the Army.
And so have you requested additional SVCs?
I know that currently the TJAG is doing a bottom-up assessment of those capabilities as well.
All right, General Bullard.
Representative Spear, we've identified the need for additional agents, additional analysts, and support individuals to be able to cover this increase in reporting that we have seen. We are in dialogue with our department now about obtaining those resources, so that process is underway. I cannot speak to the status of our Special Victims Councils within the United States Air Force, but I know that it's we have a great partnership with them. But just as General Martin pointed out, they fall within the span of control of the Judge Advocate General of the Air Force.
Okay, Mr. Lopez.
Thank you, Chairwoman Spear. To echo the Air Force, we've asked for manpower as well as technology investments. There's technology that we can utilize that would make some of these timelines even shorter. A lot of digital forensic evidence capabilities that continue to increase that I think would also help shorten timelines. Tools that can be used to get into phones and other things faster than current technology. So we're looking at that and exploring those investments because we think those could have direct correlation to timelines, as well as investing in additional manpower to get after the problem.
So for each of you, would you make this subcommittee aware of what your requests are up the chain of command? Because our role is slightly different, but we want to make sure that these cases are promptly handled, that the resources are not an impediment in you doing your jobs, and if you need additional forensic tools, we need to know what they are so that we can make sure that you're able to ascertain them. Ranking Member Banks, any other questions? Hearing none. All right. We want to thank you for your service. Thank you for being here today. What you do is incredibly important to the safety of our service members. If they don't feel safe, if they don't feel that there's the talent necessary to do the investigations, then we have failed them. So I thank you all for being here and for your participation. Committee stands adjourned.